A recording? Oh, there it is. Got it. Okay, there we go. You ready? Shabbat Shalom. Karov Adonai L'Kol Korav, L'Kol Asher Yekra'uhu V'emet. God is near to all who cry out to God, to all who cry out to God in truth. This is a verse from the Psalm, usually known as the Ashrei, which is traditionally said 3 times a day, twice in the morning, which is when I'm likely to pray, once at Mincha, the afternoon prayer. I have been praying on a regular basis since college, almost daily since rabbinical school, and this verse is stunning to me. If we just call out to God, God will be there close to us. And yet, I like to pray, usually that is, but sometimes something comes between me and my ability to open that siddur. It's the opening of it that's the problem. Once I get started, I'm usually fine. But between me and Moda Ani, bipolar disorder, major depression, 45 years of mental illness, and a stroke that made it all worse. Mental illness comes with peaks and valleys, like most illness. I remember one particular valley, as it were, sitting in my brand new rocker, holding my beautiful newborn daughter, Shira. She was screaming at my breast and refusing to eat. My tears mingled with hers. I was lost. Eventually came diagnosis. We had various help for her to learn to eat, to help her with her sensory processing issues, OT, PT, and for me, postpartum depression and a referral to a wonderful therapist. Every year, my gynecologist asked me if I am still seeing her, and every year the answer is still yes. I am in this for life. I want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you to Rabbi Andrea London for inviting me here this Shabbat to speak to you, sharing her bima, her pulpit, her trust. It takes courage to say to someone, even a colleague or a friend, sure, you can come to my congregation and talk about mental illness, about your mental illness, and then not at least demand a copy of what I was going to say beforehand. And thank you all for welcoming here. Your faces are kind. Your hearts are clearly open. But there is so much that burbles beneath the surface. It has been so much easier when I get sick to blame neurology than psychology or psychiatry. Not that's necessarily wrong, mind you. I had a stroke 21 years ago and I continue to have TIAs and other issues. That stroke, along with bringing vestibular imbalance issues, chronic migraines, and chronic fatigue, also made my mental illness much worse. And it's scary to talk about that, even among friends. Mental illness in all of its insidious forms has complicated roots. It's genetic, it's faulty wiring, biochemical, biological, it's developmental. And for most of us, it is all of that. All I know is that nobody wants to be mentally ill. No family deliberately makes their child mentally ill. No one deserves to be mentally ill. And in theory, there should be no more stigma in proclaiming that I have a debilitating mental illness than there was when I had my stroke. But it makes me a whole lot more nervous. As a lesbian friend of mine put it, I'm coming out. If I were to ask you all to close your eyes and ask those of you who are in therapy or have ever been in therapy to raise your hand, can we picture what that would look like? But if we were to open our eyes and do the same thing, how many of us would feel safe to raise our hands? Jews in therapy, Jews in our neurosis are an ongoing joke. We think of Woody Allen. But too often it is only a joke. It's a meme, if you will, instead of an issue we take seriously and try to help those who might need it. So I am coming out because I am surely not the only one. To truly be a community, people need to feel safe to come clean, as it were, to tell each other who we really are and what they might need. How else can we know each other? What else don't we really know? People who we might welcome into the synagogue, our communities, our hearts and homes, if only they felt safe to share with us. I am telling my story so that others, whatever their story, will know that here at Beth Emet, people are willing to listen and accept. And conversely, I'm speaking out so that others with complicated stories, and aren't all of our stories complicated, they do not have to tell their stories in order to belong. So depression comes and goes, at least for me. Sometimes my medication keeps me functioning. I can teach and I learn. I'm 3.5 years into my second Daf Yomi project, a folio of Talmud every day. I interact with people like a human being. Sometimes I have bad patches when getting out of bed to take a walk just feels too hard, when it's hard to concentrate, when I feel sad, lost, lonely. But as Daphne Merkin notes in her tour de force of a memoir of depression, she, or I, can put on a mask, go out in the world, and no one even knows we were weeping just hours before. It can be like a light switch, depressed at home and functioning in the world. And sometimes a whole new level of depression takes hold, and I cannot find my way back to myself, my soul, or God. A few years ago, I read a beautiful piece written by a rabbinic colleague and friend of mine about her experience of changing depression medications after having taken Zoloft for almost 20 years. Her mood had started to dip a little bit, and she and her therapist decided she had probably gotten all she could from that drug. It was time to try a different SSRI. She weaned off the familiar drug and started a new one successfully. When she spoke of her long history on the first medication, wondered where the new drug would take her. She wrote of her acceptance that she would always need such drugs, and her gratitude that they and that her therapists were there to help her through life. And she also wrote about how important it was for people like her to come forward about being treated for depression, about taking medications, about going to therapy, all this to fight stigma against mental illness. And she's right, of course. But when she says she has depression and I say I have depression, the word just does not mean the same thing. As her Zoloft decreased in effectiveness, she began to feel somewhat blue, to have less energy, to have a drop in her self-esteem. When my medication stopped working, I want to die. I can no longer remember or believe any good attributes I might have. I can't believe anyone might care for me or love me. Negative thoughts fill my brain despite my efforts to rebut them. I'm stupid, I think. I'm worthless. I should hurt myself. I should kill myself. This will never end. As one medication fades, it generally takes 2, 3, even 4 new medication attempts, each of which takes 6 to 10 weeks, before we find the one that is mildly effective. I would sometimes, frankly, kill to feel as well as my friend felt on the Zoloft before she switched to the better meds. In the meantime, I get up every morning and I try to find something to accomplish. I learn my Daf Yomi. I read email. I do a chavruta learning with my friend who listens to me intently and reminds me I have something to contribute to the world. Do at least one thing a day, they say. Be kind to yourself. But that's odd advice for someone who currently hates herself. What can you do? What can you say? My husband, Ben, and I have a daughter who is, Baruch Hashem, a graduate from law school. She is gainfully employed and seems to be launched. I'm grateful she survived a childhood with a mother who came and went, who had times of involvement and also months when I could barely get out of bed. She was always my priority. For her, I got up, I sat with her and with Ben, my long-suffering husband, at dinner. I listened to her tell the stories of her life as she grew, and I praised God for the blessing of her presence. But still, there were times that I simply wasn't there. Just this past year, for example, beginning around Purim last year, for almost 5 months, I disappeared. To say I was depressed understates the mood problem. I couldn't function. I stopped showering. I stopped driving for a while because of treatment issues. I stopped reading books, my favorite hobby, and I stopped praying. After being a regular at shul for some 35 years, I stopped going, and after praying daily for 30 years, I stopped cold. 60% of people with mental illness, they say, consult their spiritual leaders. Some 80% of us describe ourselves as spiritual. It's a religious as well as a psychological crisis. Do we as a Jewish community know how to respond? How are we going to be there for those in the midst of a mental health crisis? How do we reach out to their families? Can we make our communities welcoming to folks with mental illnesses, to people in AA, to families in need, even if people don't want to disclose their illness? We have posters in the women's room reminding us that Jewish women are susceptible to breast cancer. But where is the posting of the National Suicide Helpline for congregants who are silently in despair? My home congregation, Road of Shalom here in Denver, has a list of mental health resources on our website, part of a pull-down menu. In our lobby, we have cards for NAMI Colorado and the Colorado Crisis Line. These cards are available in subtle ways like bathrooms, so that someone who needs help can find it easily and take it privately. Surely this kind of thing could be duplicated elsewhere, helpfully across communities. A while ago, my psychiatrist asked me what Judaism thought of suicide. I think he was wondering if my spiritual life could serve as a deterrent to thoughts of self-harm. Not so much, I replied. The rabbis have caught up to the understanding that suicide is the result of a disease and should be treated as such. Have our communities? Several years ago, a friend of mine lost her mother to suicide. She didn't want to tell anyone, lest they judge her mom to be a bad person. Most of us are quick to say, no, it's a disease. But I hear the talk outside her present, and it's not pretty. We need to work on compassion. How much pain her mother must have felt. How complicated the feelings of suicide survivors. Many congregations bring back the food to families when they welcome a newborn into their house. Why don't we, as the rabbi, as the Chesed or Caring Committee, a seasoned mom volunteer, call 6 and 10, 12 weeks later to check on the mom, to see if she's experiencing the baby blues or more severe postpartum depression? Preschool teachers could be trained to look out for moms or any family members in distress and reach out, or have the rabbi do so. How can we help families know that if someone is experiencing a mental illness, our community won't hold it against them in 5 years when they're looking for a scholarship to their local Jewish day school or help with their dues for the synagogue? How do we change attitudes so that people with anxiety, people struggling with addiction can get treatment without worry about making shidduchs in 20 years? Chesed committees, caring committees, are often designed also to help the bereaved, new families, the ill. They bring food and company to those in need. Who might be interested in gathering together to reach out to the mentally ill? Folks can notice when a Shabbat or adult ed regular go missing, and we can contact them. What's up? We check in at 6 months after a death to see how are you doing, the survivors. We can post mental health literature in our lobby to indicate we see you. Mentally ill folks, you are welcome here. The mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick, the rabbis taught, is in and of itself redemptive. It doesn't cure the one who is ill, but it is curative. It takes away 1/60th of the illness, which in the rabbinic mind is the smallest fraction that is still significant. Just being a non-anxious presence, just sitting with someone who is mentally ill and suffering can help. Opening our doors to those with schizophrenia, OCD, and personality disorders is a way of fulfilling the mitzvah of haknasat orchim, of welcoming guests. And we turn them from scary strangers into congregants and friends. Sometimes folks who are mentally ill can be difficult or challenging. They can push boundaries, unclear of limits. They may have odd behaviors. And for us as a community, it becomes a matter of derech eretz. How do we want to behave? Who do we want to be with regard to these people? One of these things that got me through all those months of almost unrelenting psychological and spiritual pain was the caring, not just of Ben and my mom and my daughter, who were and are amazing, but also the 3 or 4 friends who called me pretty much every week to see how I was doing. The calls were often short, but their presence was a lifeline to the world. And so folks here at Beth Emet need not be trained in therapy or in pastoral care to reach out to a member who is hurting. They don't even need to know if the person is struggling with mental illness. You could be a calm, caring voice over the phone, over tea, who was willing to say, gee, you haven't been at services in a while. We miss you. Can I help? And since when one is depressed, it's hard to know what you need, sometimes a concrete suggestion might be in order. I'm going to synagogue this Shabbat. Can I pick you up around 6 and we can sit together? Sometimes all a mentally ill person needs is a presence, someone who will sit with her for a while and remind her she has worth. It's not our job, unless of course you're a therapist, to fix the mentally ill among us, but it is our job to have them not be alone on their journey. The Mishnah Berach speaks clearly of refuat hanefesh, the healing of soul, the spirit. The words are already there in the Hebrew in Debbie Friedman's beautiful English. But we have to speak about mental illness from the bima as an actual illness. It afflicts the person. It does not define the person. Sometimes someone with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia is ill and suffering with their disease. Sometimes that person is in remission and symptoms fade. Sometimes a person with alcoholism or anorexia is in recovery, but other times she might have a slip. The person, however, is always there, underneath, waiting to be found and seen. And we need to say those words, mental illness. We have to say them over and over again. Rabbis need to say them from the bima until it is a fact as acceptable as cancer, as an illness, not a disgrace, not a failure, an illness. And why over and over again? Well, how many times did you tell your children to look both ways before crossing the street, before it took? We need to say it over and over again until we all know it. We really know it and accept it, when it really is no big deal. So what do you say to a person with mental illness? What do you say to me? You shouldn't be afraid to tell me of your reaction of anything I said today, positive or not. Your words won't kill me. In speaking to any of us, your words probably matter less than your caring. People will forgive you all sorts of mistakes if they know you care. Remembering that you don't have to fix it, and indeed you can't fix it, helps. You can just instead share a, how are you today? And I'm glad to see you. Even a smile. These are gentle ways of simply acknowledging that you see the other person and you acknowledge their presence and you appreciate their presence. That can help. That can be enough. So over this past summer, when a new drug and treatment finally kicked in, and I began to emerge from my valley of the shadow of obsession with death, I told my psychiatrist that he and my therapist had saved my life. And he paused, he looked at me and he said, well, for now. The effectiveness of drugs come and go. It's my task to live my knowing that it's better right now, it'll be worse again, and then God willing, better again. And I need my community, my rabbis, and God to help me walk through these times. How can I learn to teach? How can I help you learn how to help me and thousands of others walk that path? Karov Adonai l'kol korav l'kol asher yikra'uhu v'emet. God is near to all who cry out to all who cry out to God in truth. Back to where I started. What does it mean to call out to God in truth? As a depressed person in the midst of my mental illness, I cried out to God over and over again, only to feel lost and alone. Now the Chachamim, the sages, might cite verse after verse explaining that emet, truth, means nothing but Torah. Surely learning and prayer is one way to overcome the darkness. But Torah learning might hint at something else, another truth. Torah is best learned in chavruta, in partners. In the depths of despair, during illness, there's nothing better than a partner, a companion, someone to be with you. And if the person wishes, to pray with you. Offering to pray for someone is a genuine kindness, an offer to put the person not only in your thoughts, but gently into God's hand. Offering to pray with someone, whether in the words of Psalms, a Mishnah Berach, a spontaneous prayer, just the Shema, is an act of mutual vulnerability. It says we are walking this path together, and that's a scary thing to do. But the psalmist reassures us if we cry out, God will answer us. If in no other way than by creating a community among us, the ill and the well, the broken and the whole, the less broken, all of us together. And that, my friends, would be worth celebrating. Shabbat Shalom.